that President Truman has no knowledge of any secret project by this government that would give substance to the existence of such objects. Ross also said that both the Air Force and the Navy deny that such objects exist.
Hey, I'm Chelsea, and I'm the battle cry of 1,000 angry Branch Davidians.
And hey, what's up? My name's Noelle, and I am the ghost of Bill Cooper.
And we have a podcast called Freaky Geeks,
where you can hear us scream about birds not being real.
And Stan Lee being the real-life inspiration for the little girl backwards crab walking down the stairs in The Exorcist.
Find us on all social media and listen to episodes anywhere podcasts are heard.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be
the owner of a comic book store.
Trust me, true believer. Well, Jagger and me, we had a running contest to see who had the most comic books in the world.
Whatever, my escape was comic books.
Net profit to me, negative $59.
I love the comics because of the brightness displayed by the fellows who drew them. They remain with me always. And when comic books first came into being, it drew me to them.
Tales from the Comic Shop.
Hey, and welcome to Tales from the Comic Shop, the show that invites you to take a peek behind the counter. Today I am joined, as usual, by Eddie D'Angelini.
Hello, everyone. I am Eddie, co-owner of Heidi Ho Comics and the creator of the comic strip Collectors.
So today we're joined by a very special guest. Today we have Rick Whitelock, owner of New Force Comics, joining us to tell us about his experience as a comic store owner. How are you doing, Rick?
I am fabulous, Joe and Eddie. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. I met Rick through the big comic group on Facebook probably about 3 years ago now. Rick was actually doing something that is very impressive. He was breaking the record for most posts in this Facebook, in Lynn's big Facebook group. It's a record that I went after, and I never even came close to touching, so I'm still very impressed by that, Rick.
You know what's funny and exciting is that Lynn Harrell was a customer of mine at my store in Panama City, Florida. He actually started that group, invited me to join it, and he would come in the store, and a lot of the stuff he would give away from the group, he would buy from my store, and we would have many conversations about the comics and hobby. And one day we were talking about him doing his little, monthly update. Should he be updating, who has the most posts, who has the most to say? And he said something, Rick, you need to be more active on this group. And I very calmly took a How I Met Your Mother and said, challenge accepted. So that was kind of how that came to be. And I spent the better part of that month, as you know, Joe, literally commenting on just about anything and everything that I found of any interest to do with the hobby.
It was incredible. I literally probably put in like 20 hours 2 months later just trying to catch you, and I still had like a third of your volume.
It was fun, and Lynn would come by and say, "Oh, here's how many you have, Rick." And so for us, it was kind of an inside fun thing to do as well. But again, when you love the hobby, it's pretty easy to talk about it. So
absolutely. And so Eddie and you have actually met. You are very active in conventions. New Force travels all over the country and hits. I mean, C2, E2. You're at, right? You're. Did you go to Dallas?
Have not been to Dallas. We've been, the only West Coast show we do is San Diego Comic Con. We do C2E2 and Wizard World Chicago, New York Comic Con, Baltimore Comic Con, Heroes Con in Charlotte, Mega Con in Orlando, the Tampa Bay Comic Con, Atlanta Comic Con. Try to go to all the major conventions. We've done New Orleans. We've done, I did Detroit last year just to give it a shot. So pretty much anywhere where there's a vintage demand, we try to be there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But San Diego is the big one, so that's where I ran into you, Rick. I passed on some copies of my books to you, and that was right before everything happened with the hurricane that we'll get into later in the show. So, it was good to, we talked online a bit, and then it was good to finally just put faces to the names and actually meet each other.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to the beginning, and why don't you tell us about your introduction to comics, Rick? What got you into funny books?
I will be happy to do that. 1972. I remember like it was yesterday because I'm still young at heart, although I'm old in physical body. My dad and I were actually, he took me to a Florida Championship Wrestling match at a little civic center, and we watched, can't remember who it was, Mr. Wrestling number 2, whatever. But after after the wrestling match, they had outside the vendors, little vendors, kind of like at a comic convention, set up selling trinkets and things like that. And on this one particular gentleman's table, on a kind of a little picture easel, I saw a copy of Silver Surfer #1. And when you're 5, 6, 7 years old and you see that majestic silver, space rider on the front of that cover, I begged my dad, please buy it for me. And of course, it was still a quarter. It was only 4 years old at the time. My dad bought it for me, and I must have read that book 100 times over my youth. And that was my introduction to comic books. And of course, 1972, the Mego Corporation put out superhero action figures. And what 7-year-old kid doesn't want to play with action figures? So that really was the introduction to toys and comics and collectibles in my life.
Awesome.
Similar to you, Rick, I think my introduction to anything superhero related was seeing Spider-Man on the old Electric Company TV show. And then following after that,
1977?
Something like that. And then following after that was the live action Spider-Man TV show, and then the Hulk TV show. And then I remember that being like my gateway into actually picking up comics and reading them.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember the Hulk, Shazam, Isis Hour, of course, Wonder Woman. No 10, 12-year-old adolescent boy didn't really enjoy Linda Carter on the small screen.
My first crush.
Absolutely.
I'm going to date myself, or date you guys, actually. My introduction to comics was also Silver Surfer, Rick, but it was the Ron Lim run.
1987, that was a great deal. I had an opportunity to buy the cover to that first book, and I wish I had done it, but unfortunately, I was too slow and missed out.
Yeah, that Silver Surfer run, it still holds up. It is, that Ron Lim Silver Surfer run is excellent. It's like, I think,
cannot argue with you at all. Even the early George Marshall covers are fabulous. So,
absolutely, no, I mean, the Silver Surfer is just a very cool character. I mean, I have read, I think, all the way from 1 through volume 3. I believe I've read every issue.
What I'm actually partial to, and I'm sure Joe doesn't remember this or doesn't know of it, but I'm sure Rick will, the 70s Fireside graphic novel that Kirby and Lee did that was an original story.
1978, I think. I have some original art pages from that graphic novel, as a matter of fact.
Yes. That was a fantastic book.
Everyone needs to read one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I've got something to look for then.
You know what? I'll send you a picture of it later, Joe. So, Rick, at what point and at what age do you decide or fall into, I don't know if you decided or just kind of fell into it, to move from fan and collector to actual retailer?
Well, I got to the University of Florida in 1985 after I graduated high school, of course. And in high school, like everybody else, you do the sports and, hopefully you get a date with a cheerleader. And so comic books kind of fell a little bit for me. But as I got to the University of Florida, I discovered Comic Buyer's Guide. I discovered Toy Shop Magazine. And to help pay my way through school, I started dabbling in running some of those little ads that you had to handwrite on paper and mail into the publications 4-6 weeks in advance, and hope that someone called your phone number or mailed you a money order to your P.O. box. And so I would say it was more as I graduated from Florida, I just didn't want to work in a bank or something along that 8 to 5 lines. So I just expanded and went full time into buying and selling comics and toys through print publications. Obviously in the late 80s, there was no internet yet. So everything was done via these monthly and weekly print publications. And we just that was step number 1 for us.
So the question then is, did you actually finish college or did you just go right into it?
Nope. I got my first BSBA in finance in 1988 from the University of Florida. Then I got a BSBA in economics in 89, and then through 91 worked on my MBA.
All right. Okay. I guess that answers my question.
But I just couldn't see myself working in a bank or as a financial consultant. Not when you love the hobby. By that time, I was 20, 21 years old, and had already had probably 15, 16 years of my life reading comics, collecting Mego action figures. And in the early 80s, I still remember the He-Man figures and the Teenage figures that Playmates produced, and then that moved into the Star Trek figures of the early '90s. Of course, everybody our age collected the '70 through '83 Kenner Star Wars figures. So that was such a big part of my life that I figured I would make that my my adult life journey.
Because it was something you knew, something you loved.
So when did you transition into opening your shop?
Well, before we did the shop, my wife and I in the early '90s were down in Miami, Florida, and that's when we kind of started New Force Comics and Collectibles, and that's when I really took on more of being an individual persona in these print ads, selling as Rick in a little ad. In my mind, having a quote unquote business just made me seem more legit when you're not meeting anybody. There's no internet. You're not in a retail environment. And so from 92 through about, I think 97, we grew our mail order collectible business, starting with Star Trek and adding Star Wars and McFarlane products. And then 97 was when we opened our first little kind of retail store in Miami, Florida. Did that until 1999, and then decided Miami was not where we wanted to raise our family. So we moved to Panama City, Florida, and that's when I opened my first small store in Lynn Haven. And by about 2011, I think we moved into Panama City, a neighboring city, and we opened up a little 1,200 square foot store, which we then a couple years later moved into a 2,200 square foot store in the same complex. And then a couple years later, we had built the business to where we had to go to a 3,600 square foot anchor store. And that's where we resided until October 10th, 2018.
And is that when the Hurricane Michael hit?
Unfortunately so. We had done Baltimore Comic Con and New York Comic Con back to back, and we flew back to Panama City on Monday, October 8th. I remember that because October 8th is my birthday, and I remember getting up Tuesday morning the 9th, going into the store and talking with our employees there that I needed to go to the bank and deposit the Baltimore, New York Comic Con checks and stuff we had. And I got to the bank and it said, "We're closed for hurricane preparations." Well, I'd been gone for 2 weeks, and quite honestly, I had heard about a hurricane, but I didn't realize that there was a Category 5 hurling towards us. So got back to my house. We closed the store up. I made sure all my personal collections, CDC and stuff, was in tubs and tarped them up and protected them. And then I sat down on the recliner and watched TV and waited for the hurricane to come. And on October 10th, I believe it was a Wednesday, after about 4 hours of holding our front door shut to keep the wind from blowing it in and watching my roof tiles be ripped away and it start to rain in my entire house and our ceiling and insulation fall all over our house, I realized that, we're probably in trouble here.
What was the extent of the damage on the shop, and what was it like when you showed back up there and actually saw it?
Well, as we finally got out of our neighborhood due to down power lines and trees down, I had a Jeep and I was able to drive over stuff and actually make it to our store complex. As I drove by it, the first thing I noticed was, of course, some of the other stores had no back walls, no roofs, insulation and metal strewn about. My store sign was ripped off. Our roof was peeled back. My back office had collapsed. The room in it, the air conditioner had rolled over the roof and had punched holes all in it. And of course, your heart sinks when you see that. And as I drove around and got in there, I'm standing in 2 feet of water, or 2 inches of water, 3,000 plus square feet of carpet soaked, merchandise, no electricity. It's 90 degrees. And it was one of those life-changing events. And I started for about 20 straight hours ripping out the wet carpet to try to get the moisture out of there best I could and try to salvage as much merchandise as I could. We then went from the store to our little warehouse, which unfortunately had the same fate. Walls were ripped down, roofs were ripped open, merchandise strewn about everywhere, wet. And so that was kind of the realization that this was definitely nothing that I would wish anybody to have to go through.
So this was a matter of not just some of my inventory got ruined and let's clean up and go on, but this is a matter of everything is lost.
It was pretty bad. I believe, now we were an anchor store, and the way the wind blew northwest, the stuff that was on the southeast part of the store was relatively protected. We were quite blessed in that respect. Unfortunately, everything in the back room, everything in my office, everything on the west side of the store was ended up in dumpsters. I mean, we took photographs and we ripped out carpet and we moved displays. We tried to salvage as much as we could, but understand that during this, the entire city was pummeled. There were no storage units that were left untouched. There were no apartment buildings that were left livable. Most houses like mine were not livable. And so there was no place to store stuff you could even salvage. So we did the best we could. We crammed things and went vertical in part of the warehouse that was safe. And the rest of the stuff went in dumpsters. That's just the unfortunate reality of it.
And was it, did you have to sit and realize, I don't have a shop anymore? I'm done here with this.
Well, listening to the landlord, and information was difficult. Verizon tower was busted, so I had no cell service. We had no electricity for almost a month. So just getting information was a challenge. Just getting food was a challenge. As I said, we had been gone for 2 straight weeks at convention, so we had let our refrigerator go empty and our cupboard go empty, and there were no grocery stores open. There was no fuel to be had. Everybody was vying for themselves. Luckily, our little neighborhood friends took care of us, had plenty of food, and we survived. And my wife's sister and one of our daughters drove up with a whole U-Haul full of gas and generators and food. Wow. So after a while, you start to realize that it's bad, but we're still alive. And so you take the glass half full mentality, and you're thankful for what didn't get damaged, and you're thankful that your family's okay, and you're thankful that you are still alive and you can rebuild. But as far as the store, listening to the landlord say, hey, we're invoking our termination policy, which is if they couldn't repair or fix something within a period of time, the complex was basically deemed unsafe. Like I said, there were roofs missing and walls missing, so it was not to be a store there anymore for us. You're absolutely right. So we were given to December 31st to have everything moved out. And of course, like I said, no place to store it. Midway through November, with the use of some generators and stuff, we were able to kind of open and resume a little bit of business. And we just fire sold, or in this case, hurricane sold, everything we possibly could. We had, large displays, the full-size C-3POs and R2-D2s, and, all the type big cabinets and display cases, and, basically anything that I could get someone locally to buy, because I had no place to put it, we sold.
And then at what point do you realize it's time to just completely start over from scratch? Whether it was, you deciding, should I stay in this area or possibly even move somewhere else completely? At what point do you realize this is my next step and it's time to move on to that, and you get moving to that? And what was that next step?
It's a great question. Luckily, our little mini warehouse, so to speak, we were more fortunate than others. Yes, we lost part of the roof, and the right half of the warehouse was was wet and damp and damaged. But we had enough of it that one of the roll doors that we could operate out of there. So we kind of continued to operate. We continued to receive diamond shipments from December until that December of 2018 through September of 2019, and just ran out of our little storage area, so to speak. We'd roll the door up on a Wednesday, and we'd have our local customers that were still buying come in. But that, in Florida heat, no air conditioners, 95 degrees in that tin can, we quickly realized that was not sustainable. And we also realized that because up to 75% of property had been damaged in Bay County, there was no place for us to even open a new store, even if we wanted to. Here I am 22 months after the storm, and my personal house, the place we lived for all those years, is still not fixed. We're close, but it's not fixed yet. So there was, at that time, a realization that we could not live there and we could not reopen a store there. So we decided that North Carolina, the mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains up in the Beach Mountain, Banner Elk area, was where we would try to resettle our family. And I opened a smaller store here, a much smaller store. The demographic in this area is completely different than what we had there in Bay County. But that was kind of the transition from us from Florida to North Carolina.
That's really interesting because you went to a completely different state. How long did it take you to really kind of acclimate your shop to this whole other area, to kind of learn the customer base, what they want, what they like, who they are, that kind of thing?
The demographic in this area, like I said, is completely different. And here we are. I opened the store in October of 2019. I ended up getting hired up here to help coach basketball at the local high school. And basketball at a high school level is almost a full-time job. So that between traveling to away games and practices every day, I really didn't get the store going until mid-February when basketball season was over. And then a month later, we all know what happened. COVID hit us. So we very much are still in the transition period of figuring out what our local demographic even is here.
Oh, wow. So that then raises a whole other question. What has business been like for you in the shop during the whole age of COVID? And did you have to actually close down? Because I did. I had to be closed for 2 months. We reopened the end of May, and our numbers are getting worse over here in LA County that we are now staring down another possible closure real soon.
Well, Eddie, it sounds like we paralleled you as well. I got the store kind of opened the 1st of March. We had a couple of good weeks, meeting all the new locals and whatnot. There's not a lot of tourist activity in March and April up here. And then, of course, I think March 17th and March 18th, North Carolina had the stay-at-home order and all non-essential businesses were to close. So by the end of March, we were closed as well for the same 2-month period. It sounds like you were.
Yeah.
During that time, I had moved 3 24-foot U-Hauls of salvaged product, a lot of sideshow figures, a lot of hot toys, a lot of statues, some long boxes, action figures, mini busts, and we filled a bunch of storage units up here with that product. And basically I did, for the first time in about 10, 11 years, I went to eBay and I started listing figures, and during that 2 month of being closed, we sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of figures and statues and hot toys and sideshows on eBay and just shipped them out every day because UPS here was still running. And then much like you, Eddie, the end of May, we were able to reopen. North Carolina went to their phase 2, which allowed businesses to be at, I think, 25% or 50% of capacity. And this is a very touristy area. People come in the winter to ski on the mountains, and people come in the summer to hike and mountain bike and enjoy, refreshing temperatures in the mid 70s. So our business the last month we've been open has actually been very strong relative to what I had anticipated it being.
Oh, wow. We are experiencing the exact opposite, because where we are in Santa Monica, we're right near like the whole big epicenter of the tourist area. We're near, if you're familiar with that area, the big 3rd Street Promenade, which is the big several block long outdoor shopping center, and the big Santa Monica Mall. If you watched any of the looting that was going on in Santa Monica, that's where it was all happening, right there. And
unfortunately, I did, and I saw the damage to your store and stuff as well. So
yeah,
we didn't have to face that. Luckily for us, I'm in a pretty nice little complex here in Banner Elk, North Carolina, and there is a fair amount of traffic. There's not a whole lot of retail, and there's certainly no comic book store. I believe that people tell me more than an hour drive just to get up to one in Tennessee, or maybe 2 hours away in North Carolina. So I definitely came up to a very rural area of the mountains, northwest part of North Carolina. So we're the only comic outlet within an hour drive for most people. So most of our locals have been so happy to have us here. They're like, wow, I can't believe we have a comic store here. And so for us, I'm basing it on, no expectations, not having any established demographic sales at all. So I feel like it's been a pretty good response relative to the COVID and the unemployment and all the things that are happening in the world.
Well, that's really good to hear, because like I was saying, we're experiencing the opposite with all the pandemic that's going on, because our area is so tourist dependent, especially during the summer months. For about 4 or 5 months throughout the year during the summer time, the Santa Monica area that we're in is just flooded with tourists just everywhere. They're all over the place. And if you go now just walk out my shop and go look at the streets, it's empty. There are no tourists. So we're kind of experiencing the exact opposite, where we're affected, where our normal summer sales are, not doing as well because of that. So, that's good to hear for you. That's great.
And Eddie, I fear that your story is what many stores around the country are facing because of the lockdowns, because of the lack of travel. And again, it's very difficult for me because I have no baseline from which to formulate an increase or decrease. When we were in Panama City, we were very blessed to have increased our sales double or triple digits every single year we were in operation. Not easy, as you know. It's hard work. You got to get out in the community. Free comic book day. You go to the boys and girls clubs. You go to the hospital children's wards. You go to the schools and you donate stuff for those, third and fourth grade, star boxes every Friday. They get to pick a prize. You go to local libraries. You talk to your local newspaper and your radio people. So I knew exactly what to expect in Panama City. I have no expectations here. So I very well could just be experiencing, the being blessed to have people come to this area in North Carolina and not being able to see comics and toys and action figures and statues. And it's just, it's maybe them being cooped up or bottled up for the last 2 months that's allowing them to spend. So I'll know next year whether this was good or not.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe this time next year, you'll be surprised to see your sales being double or triple and realize, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like.
Very much. I think you're correct. I talk to a lot of retailers, maybe like you, and I know in the majority of areas, people were shut down for months, didn't necessarily have the amount of product that they needed to sell online or have any type of online consumer base. I mentioned we don't sell online. This is the first time I'd sold anything mail order. I want to say since, I think when I looked at my eBay account, it hadn't been active since 2011, and I really think we shut our website down the end of 2007 or 8. So for me, it was new, but yet it was just reliving what we did all through the 90s and the early 2000s, which was shipping product to customers.
Yeah, we did the same thing because we have a pretty large eBay store that we've had for the entire time we've had the shop. And when we were closed, we realized, okay, well, this is our main source of income right now. We have to step it up. And my wife and I, we let our staff go because obviously we didn't really have anything for them to do. And my wife and I would be the only ones going in during the week to just pack and process orders and get it out. And I was just going throughout the whole store and the storage room everywhere and just grabbing whatever I can, whatever wasn't nailed down, and throwing it up on eBay. And I mean, that's how we got through those couple of months that we were closed. And even now, with people still being advised to just kind of, stay home when you can, and other places not being fully open, we're still kind of seeing that residual, even though I'm not as hitting it as hard, I'm still seeing that residual good sales in our eBay store because of that. People are just staying home and spending money from home.
It definitely is a new way of retail out there in the world, the e-commerce, so to speak, versus the brick and mortar walking and shopping. There's still many people afraid to leave their homes, and rightfully so, whether they're immunocompromised or whatever reason.
Yeah.
So you're right. We're definitely facing challenges right now on how to operate in this current environment.
Right. And I'm often surprised when I do meet other comic shop retailers who say they don't sell online, because I've always held the belief that, in order to really kind of survive or be successful, that's got to be a part of your repertoire, is to make your stuff available, not just for the people that come into your store, but to everyone around the world.
I think part of my problem, as Joe will attest, I'm not really technically savvy. So for me, I very much, when we stopped our online toy distribution back in the late 2000s, I really wanted to focus on in-person, person-to-person sales. My main source of income is not the store. I mean, our store did a big volume in Panama City, but we really treated it more like a clubhouse. We wanted to make sure we could pay bills, pay employees at, the salary that we could afford to do, but it was not a profit center for us. My main income, Eddie and Joe, as y'all know, comes from touring the country and buying and selling vintage comics. Of course, with COVID, virtually every major convention's been canceled this year. So that did cause me some concern back in April when all this was happening. It still is concerning today because I don't know the outlook or the future of when those type shows will be able to come back. So you're right. Online has been a saving grace for me, and it's something that we did back in the 90s and early 2000s. but I got away from it and did not want it part of my product mix because I just figured that my business model and niche was going to be that person-to-person sale.
Sure. And you, like you said before we got on, you have the gift of gab, and you enjoy talking to people, and you're very friendly. And I could see where you can have a lot of success doing that. I unfortunately have been to shops where sometimes the owners aren't really like that, and they don't really make that personal connection with a customer in order to be successful. So for someone like yourself to rely just on the face-to-face, person-to-person type of business, you've got to be like that. You've got to be the way you are. You're very talkative. You're very open. You're very friendly. And I think for someone like you, you can make your living and be successful doing it just that way.
We have been very blessed so far to be able to do that. We also, again, for me, it more is the interaction with people that have the same passion for the hobby that I have, that you have, that Joe has. We grew up with this. We grew up reading comics. We grew up, collecting our action figures and our statues and watching the TV shows. And now with the great Marvel Cinematic Universe, going to the movies. And so for me, it very much was the path that I not only wanted to take, but have been very blessed to be able to take.
Yeah, and you've done really well with that line of taking your business as far as that person-to-person type of contact is what I'm getting at, because I've been to too many shops, and I stress this with my staff and try to make an impression in my shop where I tell people, especially my staff, this is a business, so I expect you to act business-like. I expect you to be professional while you are, you of course be friendly and personable with the people when they come in. To them, it's a hangout. To you, it's a job. So I expect you to, act appropriately and act accordingly. And we try to stress the fact that our shop is not like what you see, say, on The Simpsons with the comic book guy, where it's like a kind of a clubhouse where you're looked down upon if you don't know all the details about a particular comic book character or anything like that. But it's an inviting atmosphere for anybody, no matter what level of fandom they're at. If you're a serious collector, great. If you just like to read, great, no problem. We're here to help you, and we're here to, get you more excited about the hobby. I hope that it tends to be more the norm, the way you are personally with people, and the way I like try to stress my business, rather than the old unfortunate stereotype of comic shops being the dirty, dark, dingy place where the owner sits there, looking down on you if you don't buy the right thing. You know what I'm saying?
I definitely know the stereotype. I do know that, even right now in my little store here in North Carolina, and we're post-COVID, where I had turned my store, like many did, into a shipping depot because we weren't open to customers. Mm-hmm. Even now, to have someone come in and be a big smile on their face and say, wow, this is such a nice, clean store. It's neat, or brightly colored, or, it's so nice to be welcomed into a store, or someone just to talk, say hello. Sure. That has to be second nature. It has to be, like you said, not something taught. It's just something people want to do. You got to want to share your passion with anyone that walks in the door. And sometimes I have customers that know more about certain storylines than I do, of course, and that can open up dialogue and entertainment with each other. And, customers become friends, and friends become relationships. And that's really what will allow the comic store to continue to move forward, I think, given all the challenges we have with distribution and companies and decisions that have been made because, or maybe not because of COVID.
Yeah, and piggybacking on what you just said, it's funny how many people might come into my shop who have never been into a comic shop before, and they have a misconception of what comic shops are like. And when they walk into my shop, they think, wow, I'm shocked. Your place is so bright and clean and organized. And I have to laugh because I'm thinking, what exactly did you expect? If you walked into any other business, you would expect that no matter what.
And that's the stereotype that we battle. And so it's up to each of us that do want to move comic stores into the future. In my little area, as I mentioned to you earlier, I think we're the only real comic store within, I don't know how many miles, but people tell me you got to drive an hour to Tennessee or an hour here. And I'm not real familiar with the geography of this area yet because I've only lived here a few months myself. But when you have an opportunity to introduce somebody to our hobby, and you don't take advantage of that opportunity and you don't welcome them and you don't show your enthusiasm, it certainly is not helpful.
Oh, I absolutely agree 100%. And it's not just in your attitude, but it's also in how you train your employees and how you present your store to the general public. All of that has to be part of the equation in this.
I was so blessed in Panama City to have folks that worked with us that were not only knowledgeable but genuinely loved the hobby, loved to interact with people. Up here in North Carolina, though, Eddie, you mentioned yourself you had to let your staff go because of COVID. Well, I started the store much like I started my first store all those many years ago, just me. And so my store is an extension of myself. Now, I hope to grow this area. Or hope to grow our store in this area so that I have to have help again and can employ people who, much like me, share the same enthusiasm and love for the hobby. But that's the one thing I miss most about Panama City is not only our great customers, but the great folks that we got to work with. And that's kind of it's kind of sad, but at the same time, too, this is a new chapter, so we'll move forward the best we can.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of moving forward, the future of LCSs is kind of up in the air right now. I know, Rick, you told me that you've seen prognostication that up to 20% of stores of comic shops might close because of COVID. What do you see for the immediate future of LCSs, and even going out forward from here? Like, how do we move forward as an industry?
That is the real challenge. As Eddie and I were both closed for 2 months. Every comic store owner I know in major cities had to close for some period of time. Some of them have not reopened. A lot of this is anecdotal information you get from people that post in some of those large Facebook groups, Joe, you and I were talking about, where their local store has closed. Some of it you kind of have to extend who you know and what you know to formulate those type of estimates. But moving forward is a challenge. Obviously, the DC break from Diamond is going to really be kind of I guess maybe apex is the word, as to which way we go from here on out. What is the future of local LCSs? I, unfortunately, am not as optimistic about that as I'd like to be.
I have to admit that I'm kind of right there with you. And it goes beyond just comic shops, but small mom and pops in general, unfortunately. How long can any of these places continue to be either closed or operate at 25 to 50% of their normal sales? At some point, it's going to have to be a decision of, do we keep going or do we pack it in now, unfortunately?
Well, Eddie, you and I know that when you don't own, when you're not a large chain, I'll use, Graham Crackers in Chicago is wonderful. They have 10, 12, 13 stores in various states. When you're a single store or maybe even 2 stores, the life of a comic book owner and retailer is typically not a life of luxury. We joked about looking out a window at a Lamborghini, but most comic store owners I know operate, you hate to say it, week to week, month to month, are so reliant on comics, toys, and magic cards and gaming that come in every week, and their customers paying their bills every week, that when you sustain a month or 2 months of no income, and then you have to do reduced income, whether Marvel's releasing books every other week or the transition to DC distribution of books, I fear it's going to be a challenge for, I don't want to say the majority of comic stores, because I don't have that handle on the entire country. I don't have access to Diamond's, internal information on what accounts are ordering what. But if you can kind of speculate and read the writing on the wall and just listen and put your ear to the ground, I don't hear as many footsteps as you would hope to hear.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately that is going to be in the future of this pandemic. But if you try to look a little bit past that, at some point when we are past this, and we eventually will be past it, whether it's the end of this year or maybe the end of next year, there's going to come a point in time where people are doing better, and we are never at a loss of comic book fans and collectors who want to own a shop, who want to open up a shop. At some point, it may come to a point where they financially, either with the economy as a whole or them personally, will be in a position where they can say, yeah, I can do this. And maybe you might see shops start to spring up once this is all over, kind of like replacing the ones that unfortunately went away.
A nice sentiment. Somebody once told me the way you make $1 million running a comic store is start with $2 million. I'm sure everyone's heard that more than one time. I looking on Instagram and Facebook and some of these CGC board chat groups and stuff like that, I hear lots of people that have desire to open a store. Oh, I want to open a store. I want to do this when I retire. And I also see many retailers jump in and say, you know what? The economy, whether it's new book distribution, product mix, brick and mortars with the increases in rents and revenue, but more so than that is the reality of e-commerce. Amazon, of course, has changed the face of how we do business. They're shipping more boxes now, I think, than UPS and FedEx and USPS distribution channels can even handle at this point on an effective scale. So does e-commerce replace the brick and mortar store? And if that's one part of the equation, what would allow comic stores to spring back up? Certainly not this DC break from Diamond. That, I think, hurts the proposition of opening new comic stores. But again, that's my opinion.
Well, I kind of hold the same opinion as you when it comes to this DC thing. And they couldn't have sprung this on us at a worse time. When shops are struggling to get back open and deal with, their landlord and maybe back rent that they're dealing with, or trying to make enough money selling online to keep going. And then suddenly now they're thrown this whole fiasco of, by the way, you've now got to you got to choose one of these two new distributors and start an account to get your DC books, and you've only got 2 weeks. So hurry up and get it done. And that really put a bad taste in my mouth. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't know if you experience this as well. We had talked about this on a previous show that they had lied. Unfortunately, DC had lied to us retailers a few times along the way to this, because it was just a week or so before. And this was a show that you did without me, Joe, so you can corroborate whether I'm getting the details right. The week before that they announced their break from Diamond, people were asking, how come you guys aren't in the new previews catalog? And they pretty much lied about that, saying, oh, well, we didn't get in on time. No big deal. We'll be in the next one. Something to that effect. And then the week later is when they announced their break. So they knew it was coming, but yet they lied to us.
I remember when Adam Phillips sent out the DC newsletter saying, hey, you guys that are with Diamond will still be able to order from Diamond, and those of you that want to go with UCS and Lunar will be able to do that. And we're here to support you guys. That was kind of the gist I got from that mass email to retailers. And you're right, a week later, the wolves pulled over our eyes. We're left to scramble around, Diamond canceling DC orders, trying to figure out how to manually enter orders, the amount of work it takes, the additional shipping cost, the uncertainty with consumers. I still have customers that don't even know where to go to find what's coming out next month. Unlike previews and the DC monthly publication and the Marvel monthly publication that gave you those, books that were coming out on each month and each week. I still have customers today say, I Google it and I can't find to even know what books are coming out from DC. So I definitely have to agree with you. This entire transition couldn't have, in my opinion, been handled worse.
Yeah, and if you go back a little even farther, you'll probably remember that when they did announce the two new distributors, they did not disclose that it was both Midtown and Discount Comic Book Service. And it was other retailers who did the detective work and found that out. And then DC had to basically admit to it.
I remember that breaking on several. It may have been, I read about it on some of the news groups and stuff, but I have not given it a second thought either, because you don't want there ever to be potential conflict of interest. Many retailers don't want to get proprietary information, such as their credit card information or their sales history, to basically online competitors. I've heard people mention what happens when a book like Batman 89 gets hot. And right now, we could order from Diamond. Diamond's the wholesaler. They're going to sell it to you at a wholesale price that they sell out, because they're not affected by fluctuations in retail price and demand. And I'm certainly not going to say that Midtown or DCBS, whatever they are, would ever do that, because I know they probably have had to sign agreements that they wouldn't show, the two distribution companies would not show, you know, priority to
Favoritism,
them.
yeah.
Favoritism, that's a great word. But I just can't help to think that, those stores might be well stocked with those books while my reorder goes to back order. I don't know that to be a fact, but that certainly is a concern that I've heard from many retailers. Then you've got the multiple shipping costs. They don't have the economies of scale that Diamond did. They certainly don't have Diamond's distribution network or pickup points. They don't have their ability to advance reorder like you could with Diamond. The subscription services, without there being an integrated platform yet for UCS and Lunar to feed that information into most people's RMS, retail management systems. I know, Eddie, you told me you upgraded to Comic Hub. I'm still using Comic Suite, and a lot of my Comic Suite information from DC is disappearing. And what am I going to do when those August titles ship that Diamond doesn't enter that information into my RMS system? How do I then have inventory management? How do I scan those out for my customers? How do I manually order for my customers? I'm doing I bought myself a 300-page spiral notebook, and I'm back to 1988 again, where I'm writing down a title and I'm writing down each of my customers' names. I want to order that title. That's how much extra work this is creating for us.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. While Comic Hub lets me keep track of who has what DC books on their pull, it doesn't really allow me to just automatically have those numbers reordered right away. So I have to literally go and check for each title, how many pull customers do I have for this, so I can then manually, input the numbers for that. So I think I'm maybe like a little bit better than you, but it's still it's not optimal, and it takes way longer.
And I know you've heard the same thing I've heard, the same things that many customers are complaining about out there in internet land, is that their stores have chosen either not to carry DC product at all. I know one store in my old stomping grounds has told their customers that they're not going to carry DC. The other stores decided they're only going to carry DC for their subscribers, that they're not going to order any for the shelf. Right. Again, I'm not one of those, cut off my foot to spite my face or cut off my nose, whatever the saying is. I'm still ordering extra DC for my shelf. I'm definitely ordering it for my customers because, again, I care about the hobby. I care about my customers. I want them to get the books. But the amount of work this is taking, I cannot lie and tell you that it hasn't entered my mind. Do I want to continue to work under these circumstances? Is there going to be a fix coming? And is this kind of opening the Pandora's box to potentially ending DC putting out publication of the monthly floppy? These are all questions that we got to have answers to. That goes back to answer your question, Eddie, about will there be more stores in the future? Will this hobby remain healthy like it has been somewhat the last decade or so?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I want to try to be optimistic like that, but I think, I can't help but agree with you with your pessimism regarding that, and the fact that whether we like it or not, the hobby is going to change, whether it means less monthly floppies coming out and more going to digital, which we're already seeing Marvel do, by the way. And I don't fault them for what they've done recently, because their choice was either we cancel these miniseries altogether or we move them to digital to finish off and then put them out in trade paperback afterwards, which that I can get with, because if it means that a smaller selling miniseries may or may not get published because it's not worth it to put it out in print, then fine, put it out in digital, collect it in trade later on so we can sell it in the shop. That, unfortunately, seems to be where things may be headed to a certain extent, and we just have to deal with it.
I think, though, that kind of is the telltale to the underlying problem is, where are our comic book collectors and readers that titles that, at least on the DC or Marvel boardroom, are getting greenlit, that they can't even sustain a minimum order quantity, making it worthwhile to print? That's what scares me more than anything else, is that I know we're not going to ever get back to the day of consistent 500,000 publications, because there's too much entertainment out there that will kind of take away from readership. When I was young, you had comic books, you had baseball cards, and you played in your front yard, and you had 3 channels of TV on the rabbit ears. Today, our kids have Xbox and eBay. I'm not eBay, but the internet, and they've got iPads, and they've got 6,000 streaming channels and YouTube, and they've got so many distractions and so many things that are vying for their entertainment time and dollars that maybe, unfortunately, the comic book printing part of the hobby might be going the way of extinction.
Unfortunately, to a certain extent, I can't help but agree. There's got to be, if you want to keep the medium alive and it can't stay alive in monthly print form, then it's going to go somewhere else. Just like a lake, if you dam up a certain part of a lake, the water is then going to divert somewhere else. So it's just a matter of us trying to figure out where's it going to go and can we get ahead of it.
I completely disagree with you guys. They still sell vinyl records and cassette tapes, and I'm pretty sure you can even go out and buy 8 tracks if you want to. Whether or not it's going to be as big as it has, I mean, there will be a demand for a floppy format of comics indefinitely.
But will the demand be big enough to sustain a comic book shop? That's the problem.
I feel like what Rick was saying about magic cards and action figures and pops, and yes, it might become more of a hobby shop than a comic shop at some point. But there's 2 things that you guys, I think, are discounting. I think the community that you get in your LCS. Like, I can order every comic book that I buy from Midtown for less and not have to drive 20 minutes to my local comic shop. But what I don't get when I do that is I don't get to see the people that I know at the comic shop, and I don't get to have the conversations, and I don't get to have the opinions and the recommendations. I mean, I can't tell you how many characters in comics I read. Probably about 65% of the comics that I read are based on the recommendations of other people. And I think that I think you were right, Rick, with saying that I think DC's their ultimate goal here is to move to OGNs and digital. But I think that's a very executive made decision from someone who doesn't understand the community. Yeah, so that's my take.
Well, but we need enough people like you in order for a comic shop to survive, though. That's the problem.
Well, that's why I'm saying it might become more of a hobby shop situation where where your comic wall isn't. You can't afford to have the comic wall take up all that real estate anymore. Because I know, we all know the trick to maintaining a business is to figure out how to get the most price per square foot, right?
Yeah.
Like whether it's a bar or a comic shop or a bookstore or a record store or whatever. Well, so you might not have all that real estate dedicated to comics, but I believe in one form or another the floppies will still be there.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 things I want to ask Rick about. There's 2 things that I think could save the industry and shops, and I'm wondering if you might agree with this. One, for as much as the retailers gripe about those 100-page DC Comics in Walmart, I think having more comics available in more locations is going to bring in more readers and eventually more people into the comic shop, because they're going to start hunting more specialty stuff, which hopefully will bring them into the shop. But really, while collecting is great, we need more readers. When the industry was huge back, say, I don't know, 50s, even 70s, or whatever, it was built on the backs of people who were reading all this stuff voraciously. So I think, one, getting more readers is going to bring more people into the shop. And the way you get more readers and people in the shop is by having comics available in all kinds of places. Like if you go to Japan, you can go anywhere and literally get a manga book out of a vending machine at the train station. And comics are looked upon as mainstream reading over there. And I think we need to bring more of that mindset here to get more people to read and get into the comic shop. The second thing that I think is going to save shops is, like bookstores, we need to have full or at least partial returnability. And that's like not even a maybe or an if. We have to have that.
To address your second point, the returnability aspect would be huge because it would allow, like we talked about earlier, it's some of the margins on these books and some of the operating capital stores have seem somewhat limited. So if you were able to take a chance, for example, and order 25 extra copies of Negan Lives #1, which came out this week, you might be able to sell them. You can't sell what's not on your shelf. And so many stores that I've talked to are so gun shy because back issues don't sell for $4, they sell for $1 or 50 cents or a quarter at a convention, that if you had some returnability, and I for one would be willing to give up some percentage of profit for returnability because I like to do things on the mass quantity. When I was a toy distributor back in the 90s and 2000s, I worked myself on a very small margin, and I was happy moving 3,000 cases of a Simpsons product at 10% rather than trying to sell 30 cases at 100%. The economies of scale, the bulk, the Walmart mentality, so to speak, of moving large quantities at lower profit margins can be very profitable. The returnability aspect would be huge. I don't know. Some people would consider it environmentally wrong because you're wasting more paper, overprinting, but that would be one very wonderful way to potentially increase readership. Eddie, I don't know how many times the books come out that maybe someone's walked in your store and said, do you have a copy of this? And Diamond doesn't have any more because they only overprinted 2%. And you were like, man, I should have ordered 5 more copies, but I didn't want to risk those 5 copies going into the quarter bin.
Yeah, where this really came to light was when they started Hickman's new X-Men run for the House of X and Powers of X books. I ordered basically based on my previous X-Men numbers. And boy, everybody did that, and everybody was wrong. Everybody sold out of those first few issues, literally like the first hour or two of opening on a Wednesday. And if we had all basically been told, hey, you get full returnability on the first 3 issues of these new X-Men series, and it's going to be big, and we definitely recommend you order big on this stuff because it's Jonathan Hickman. I would have said, okay, I'll take the chance because if it doesn't sell, I'll just send it all back. And I would have sold every single copy that I ordered.
We certainly could have created more potential, going back to your point number one, readers. I sometimes wonder in some communities where Walmart is the largest retailer in that community, how many of those comics that sat in their little section, though, were bought by comic book store folks that either speculated on them, wanted to sell them on eBay. I know in Panama City, where I was, when the Walmart first released the PCs, the only people that bought them were our customers. They were already customers from our stores. I mean, they come in, they buy them all, they'd resell them. I don't know how many of those $4.99 comics made their way into new readers' hands potential. Even now, we see the Walmart reprint packs of the Batman '89 third prints and stuff. Joe, you probably seen in the groups. How many already existing comic collectors you see that went in there and bought them all? And so that's a wonderful, ideal to have books out there available for people to read. But even with the movies and all the promotions and the free comic book days, unless the comic book store retailer is willing to get out there, like I said, and pound the pavement and go to libraries and go to boys and girls clubs and go to children's wings hospitals and go to schools, I think that's how we get the readership up. That's how we were able to, literally every year our store was open, we had double or triple digit sales increases. And it wasn't just because Walmart had a book or your local gas station had a book. It's because everyone in our store and all our customers cared enough to spread the word and go out there and do it. That, to me, is how we're going to save comic stores, LCSs, and readerships. But if you have the stereotypical dirty comic store with the owner that sits behind the counter that doesn't care, that waits for people to come to him, that's going to be a slow death for our hobby.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, what it feels like is, say if the record companies put out, I don't know, like the new Madonna album, and I'm just throwing out Madonna's name just for the sake of it, and then expects us shop owners to go out with that album and promote it and sell it and get new listeners. It just seems kind of backwards. Unfortunately, that's the way it is, though. I agree with you.
I heard some people online posted, the ending of Diamond's monopoly of DC is going to be so good for the hobby and that this will put comics in more people's hands. And I guess not them understanding the distribution channels, it actually has restricted because we've had shops that have decided they're going to stop carrying DC products. I certainly don't think that Lunar or UCS has any more ability, probably less ability than Diamond did to put comics in other outlets. That potential always been there. So I don't know what kind of move that has in a helpful benefit. Hopefully companies like Marvel and Image and some of the others don't follow suit, and that we can allow independents to still be able to distribute through Diamond. But you're right, it's kind of backwards, but if we don't go out there and promote and get new readers, I don't see new readers just happening.
The number one thing that makes me walk out of a new shop, is when I go in and the guy behind the counter is too busy talking with his buddy about Magic cards to even like give me the time of day. When I do get into a conversation, the guy tells me how terrible all the new comics are. It's like, why would I want to buy something that you just told me is awful?
I
and then they're like,
that.
well, I thought you wanted to buy comics. Well, I did until you told me they all suck.
I stress that to my staff. It's like it is mandatory that when someone walks into our shop, you have to greet them. You let them browse a little bit, but then you approach them at any one time saying, how are you doing? Can I recommend anything? Are you looking for anything special that I can help you with? It's customer service. And if, like you said, if the guy behind the counter is just ignoring you and talking to his buddy about Magic or whatever else, that's just bad customer service. And same thing what you said about the comic books. For my staff, you don't have to like all the comic books that are coming out. You don't have to like them. You just have to sell them. That's your job. And telling people who come in that, oh, no, those are all terrible, is not doing your job at all. What do you do to train your staff as far as being customer service oriented rather than just being fanboys?
Well, in Panama City, we were fortunate. We had folks that worked in the store part-time, and very blessed to have had everybody was a comic book fan. So it was a whole lot less me needing to train, other than these guys and gals understanding that we're in an environment of a hobby we love. Comic books that everyone had been reading since, the 60s and 70s and so forth. So I was really blessed that when you came in our store, it was infectious. It's kind of like the COVID virus. Everyone that walked in our store caught it, because we genuinely had something to say about virtually any topic of, whether it was a book or a statue or an action figure. Here in North Carolina, like I said, I'm starting this by myself. So it's real easy for me to control. But if somebody walks in the store and they don't feel like this is the place they want to be, then that's on me. The store is a reflection of me. And so I think that it's going to be very easy initially, because again, I generally love the hobby. I love all the formats. Again, if somebody has a question, I'm more than happy to answer it. I may expound on it to us for their shut this guy up, let me get out of here. But we're a very niche hobby. I don't know how much of an impulse we are, but I think Joe mentioned that stores have to become less comic stores and much more hobby stores. But every store I've gone in is already there. They already have T-shirts and Funko Pops and Hero Clicks and Magic the Gathering and comics and graphic novels and action figures and statues. If you don't already, there are very few true comic book only stores that exist. I can't count them on my hand how many I've been in the last 10 years. So we're already at that mixed level, in my opinion. I mean, I love looking at like Bedrock City in Houston. I mean, they have incredible product mix and the well-trained staff, and the owner, Richard Evans, is one of those guys that you can tell just loves comics, and all of his people love comics. And I can't imagine that anyone that walks in their stores aren't better off for having done that. Eddie, just knowing of you what I know, I'm guessing that when they walk in your store, they get the exact same results. And I know when they come in mine, they will. So that's really, it has to come down to us to make the LCS continue to be viable. But we haven't been just comic book stores. I know back issues have shrunk in so many people's stores, and that's become more of a convention kind of diving frenzy, 25-cent books and 50-cent books and dollar books and so forth and so on. I like selling the $10,000 X-Men one or the $100,000 Superman one. I find just as much pleasure in that as selling the 4 for $1 closeout stuff.
Yeah, there's nothing more fun, whether you're doing a show for us when we do like a big blowout sale in the shop, like at our previous location where we had a giant parking lot. You can do it in there, and you are just clearing stuff out from your storage unit, putting all the long boxes all over all the tables and sometimes underneath because you have so many. And you're telling people, like all the comics are like, a quarter a piece or 5 for $1. And you got people that are just it's like a feeding frenzy. It's like throwing chum in shark infested waters, just watching people go nuts and saying, can I get a box? Can I get a box? And filling it up. And that's always fun because one, you get to see people just having a good old time, just picking out all kinds of stuff that they're going to enjoy and read. And two, because you're making money on all that dead stuff that you've been having in your storage unit for God knows how many years. So that's always a fun thing too.
One thing I found to be successful for me, and I know not everybody tends to agree with this, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody look at a book in our store that maybe potentially is going to buy it or not, and it goes back on the shelf. I pick that book up, I hand it to him, I said, take this and read it on me. If you love it, you come back and pay for it. If you don't love it, okay, bring it back and let me try to sell it to somebody else. I found that to be, not only is it a trust with you and this new customer, they're saying, holy cow, here's a guy giving me a book to read. There's something to that. I don't know how many other stores do it, and I don't know how many stores can afford to do it, but there have been days where I've created customers, and talking about Joe creating readers, by just giving them a book, telling them to take it home, and trusting that if they bring it back and they pay for it, fantastic. Maybe you get a new subscriber. But I don't just give away books on Free Comic Book Day. I literally give away books every single day. And sometimes it's stuff I've over-ordered that, Eddie, if we have returnability, maybe I wouldn't, but I still think I would give some away. But knowing we don't have returnability and knowing that book might end up in a 50-cent or quarter bin anyway, I think if more stores did that, we could create more of a casual looker. Hey, I'm just in here looking into someone that, might become a reader / collector / fan / hobbyist / enthusiast. Who knows what you can create with something like that.
I couldn't agree with that more. And we do that as well. And when it is the time that we love to do it, both my wife and I, is when a dad will come in with their kid. And the dad obviously it might be a regular customer, but the dad is the one who is the reader and the collector and is spending their time looking at everything and picking out what they want. Meanwhile, the kid is just following them around, bored out of their mind, because they just have no frame of reference with this. They don't think that it's anything interesting to them at all. And we will approach them and talk to them a little bit and kind of get a gauge of what they might like, and we'll give them a free copy, whether it's maybe like one of the newer floppies or maybe one, a few months old or whatever, and say, you should read this because I think you'll like it because of this and this. And I tell you what, when you come back with your dad, you let us know if you liked it and what you thought of it. And they get excited because now you've given them a job to do. You've given them a mission, and they'll go home and they'll read it. So that's when it's worthwhile.
You hit the nail right on the head. I can't tell you how many times you want to get that dad or that mom back in your store. You want to create a new reader. You give a kid a comic. You give him 2 comics. You give his sister a comic. You tell them, oh, you got to let me know how you like this. What's your favorite character? That absolutely is. And I don't know how many other stores are utilizing that technique, but it's so nice to see that father or that mother not only return with their kids, but sometimes just return themselves just to thank you or to buy a book or to support your local business. And sometimes it's a one-off, but sometimes they're customers for life.
Yeah. And this is why it's important, I think, for all retailers to over-order on the Free Comic Book Day books, because they're not just for one day. They're for all year.
You're correct. That's what I told you. I don't just give away comics on Free Comic Book Day. It is, and I know they cost a quarter. They cost us 30 cents, whatever it is. I think we bought 2018 was the last year we did it because last year we didn't have a store due to the hurricane. But I think we bought 4,000 of those, and it probably cost us $1,000. But the amount of traffic and new customers you can potentially reach, especially if you have it, like we had a great guy in Panama City that would write articles for the newspaper. He was a comic book fan, and he would help drive business to other stores. We were all very amicable. We helped each other out. And if you have that kind of support in your community, you can grow your readership and your collectorship and not really worry about, hey, is someone taking business from me? Am I taking business from them? We're all trying to grow the hobby as a whole. That's a good thing as well.
Oh, agree. I subscribe to the saying that the high tide raises all boats.
You have a lot of notoriety, and you are known for being a purchaser of some large books. We're talking, six. Have you bought books in the seven figures?
I have not bought a single book in the seven figure yet, but I'd like to.
But you are known for buying some of the most enormous books. I mean, books that you have owned. I mean, the Holy of Holy Grails, Action 1, Tech 27. What else? Help me out here.
I can tell you, we bought and sold multiple copies of Action 1, Tech 27, Captain America 1, Marvel 1, Batman 1, Superman 1, All-Star 8, pretty much every gold and silver key, bronze too. But my real passion on the vintage market is the golden age and the silver age of comics. Obviously with Marvel, the birth and the 61 with FF1, but I go all the way back. I love all the pre-hero stuff as well. I collected Centaurs and Cheslers and early Fox books and Quality and Lev Gleason and MLJs and you name it. Those books are appealing. That they started our entire hobby. Some of the early works of Bob Kane and Bill Everett and Paul Gustafson and even someone like Alex Schomburg. That's the stuff that really kind of gets my juices flowing. So, an opportunity to buy an Action 1 or to sell an Action 1 or to buy a collection of keys or Silver Age keys or whatever it is, that's motivation for me. I want to be in that conversation.
What goes into the purchase of like an Action 1 when you're spending $500,000 on a comic book? Like, what is the thought process that goes into it? What is the can you vicariously describe the experience for us?
Besides, I want it.
Never experienced that.
I can tell you, the first time you do it, you're scared out of your you-know-what. You're talking about the very first major book I bought that was at a high level. Part of what happens is you have to be confident. People that purchase books in 4 figures and 5 figures and 6 figures, sometimes they have disposable income where it doesn't matter whether they, what they do with it. But a lot of times it's having confidence that if I buy this book for $10,000, let's be real, it doesn't matter who you are, what kind of money you have. You want to hope that book will maintain value or even grow in value. There is some sort of investment component to spending that kind of money. I don't care what anyone says. Nobody goes out and buys a $200,000 book just because they want to read that book. There's 2 other options for that. There is definitely that tangible value and potentialization that I think every book I've ever bought and everyone I've ever sold like that, you hope that book maintains value or go up. Now, it doesn't always happen. We've all bought books that we've lost money on. So maybe you can say, oh, I really enjoyed owning it. But the truth of the matter is, it's scary. The first time I went out and bought a big book, I was borrowing money off my HELOC, off my home, to buy an Action Comics #1 that cost, I think, $575,000. I was scared bleepless because if something goes wrong, you have just affected your family, your entire life. But I had people around me that gave me confidence that I wasn't the only guy willing to spend that kind of money on a book like that. Now, of course, you're not going to get a $500,000 Action Comics 1 for $22 at Goodwill. The probability of that happening is infinitesimally small. It's just not going to happen. You've got to be willing to take a chance to buy a Superman 1 for $125,000 to maybe sell for $130,000. Your profit margin might be low single digits, but the confidence you'll get from that and the confidence that you can portray to your buyer is what makes a deal like that happen.
I have a Batman 2. That's probably the most I've ever spent on a single comic book. And just waiting for it to transport through the mail was about as nerve-wracking as I've experienced as I've had.
It's scary stuff for sure. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I was curious about. So when you go from con to con, or you're traveling around the country, and you've got this van that you're transporting, I mean, I looking at your booth, your booth has to be between $500,000 and $1 million in inventory, right?
That would be on the very conservative end. I have 3 different type of shows I do. We have an A show, which would be San Diego Comic Con, New York Comic Con. Those are the books. And Action 1 and Attack 27 alone is 7 figures. That's 2 books. You've got every other book in there. Batman 1, Superman 1, Marvel 1. At a typical San Diego Comic Con, you can have $2 to $3 million of inventory and a little 10-foot booth. At a B show, which for me is a 20-foot setup, I bring my wire racks. I bring all of my my CDC inventory that's not 6 figures. I don't bring Action 1s. I don't bring Tech 27s because typically, the market for those books, if you want to buy an Action 1, it's a very sparsely populated end of the pool, so you don't need to risk bringing those books to lower cons. You have insurance costs, like you said. You have the risk of what happens if, and then I've got the little weekend shows, the regional, where you bring your dollar books and your 50-cent books. You might bring a New Mutants 98, or you might bring a Nix number 3 or something, but you don't bring an AF-15 to that type show. So for me, when I go to San Diego, New York, those books fly with me on a plane. They don't leave my sight. When we do a B show where we're doing a 20-foot setup, you're right. We fill our van up, and our van could have a whole lot of dollars of books in there. But if you don't bring those books to the shows, you can't sell them. You can't sell an AF-15. People ask me, why do I put 3 or 4 or 5 copies up? I'm making it look like this book's common. The bottom line is none of these books are really rare. If you have the desire to buy them and the resources, you can get anything you want with a phone call, whether it's Action 1 or whether it's New Mutants 98. There's really not a lot of difference in terms of the supply is there relative to demand. But if you don't have them out there, you can't sell them. And so I want to bring 10 copies of X-Men 1 to a convention, and maybe I only sell 1 or 2 or 3, but if you don't have them there, you can't sell them. So that's kind of my philosophy on something like that.
When you're transporting 6-figure books, I mean, that you get an individual insurance for that book, or like?
Well, we have insurance with collectinsure.com. They insure. We have a dealer policy. They do insure you during transport. If I'm doing a what I call a B show, and I'm taking my maybe a $20,000 AF-15 or $10,000 X-Men 1, the way we pack our van, those books are always accessible to me. And so when I'm not with them in the van, they get loaded up on a hotel cart and they're in the room with us. Those books are, the only books I ever leave in our van would be dollar books or 50-cent books. If somebody wants to steal a 50-pound box of 50-cent books, God bless them, because that's just one less. That's one less thing I got to carry into the convention hall. You know what I'm saying? But when I do a big show, those books, we hand carry those books on the plane with us. You can't imagine some of the looks I get when we go through security and the TSA agent, wants to pull me off and say, what's this bag with, these comic books in these plastic cases, and what are you doing? And when you explain it to them, sometimes their eyes light up, and you don't know, maybe you've just created a potential comic book fan in them. But transportation is really physically loading and unloading. But books that have value, I don't leave them out of my sight. Like I said, they're in CDC boxes. I pull them out from under the racks. I load them up on a cart. My wife and I take them into the hotel room with us, and the next morning we load them up. We take them into the hall. We have them under lock and key when we're not there. We can cage them up and put them to where it's very difficult for books like that. But hey, where there's opportunity there, someone's going to try. I know, Eddie, you've probably been at shows where large books have been stolen. Joe, you've seen, heck, with me, it happened at Tampa Comic Con a few years ago. I had a box of very valuable books go missing that was, fortunately returned to me after the show. So there's always risk. That's what insurance is for. But if you don't take the books to these shows, if you don't transport them, you can't sell them.
Absolutely.
I thankfully have never had any big books like that stolen at shows, but I can identify with the whole idea of spending all that time loading and unloading and setting up cheap books like quarter, 50 cent and dollar books to just sell what you can at shows, because there's been days where shows where the last day on the Sunday, maybe the last hour or two, my wife were thinking, you know what, if there's any books left over after the shop, after the show closes, what do you say we just run away? Just walk away from it all. Just run away.
Well, also, I mean, another thing with transport, I mean, I'm sure you're risking damages. I would have to guess that you've, of course, dropped a box of comic books and in the course of moving between shows. I mean, that seems like it would be just an inevitability of.
I remember New York Comic Con 3 or 4 years ago. I was hand carrying 2 CDC boxes on one of those little luggage carts, and we were going down the escalator, and I guess I didn't have the cart flush on one step. You know how the steps kind of raise and lower, and that box slid 40, and this was after the show was over, so there wasn't anyone else on the escalator. That box of 25 CDC slabs slid 25 feet down that escalator. And when they got to the bottom, the thing rolls. It kept kick, hitting them. When I got to the bottom, 23 of the 25 books the slabs had been damaged. But thank goodness they were in CDC slabs, because none of the books themselves had any harm. And I know, if those books had been raw, I could have lost no telling how much in value. So I know there's the anti-CDC group out there, but in this case, those cases can't be protected because, yes, drop boxes. We were at a San Diego Comic Con 3 or 4 years ago, and our rack fell, and all the books came crashing down. And again, broken cases and stuff, but never damage to a book. So we've been very blessed in that respect as well.
When I moved, so this is my horror story. One of my most valuable comics is I have an Edge of Spider-Verse 2 land variant that's a 9.8. I've shared it on the show before. When I moved, that was the one book that fell out of the box and landed on the ground, and the case broke.
But the case protected it, right?
Yeah, no, the book's fine. But so CGC, yeah, they do what they're supposed to do, and that's
and a reslabbing fee is not that much.
No, it's definitely well worth it. I will happily pay the $40 to ship my book there, get it reslabbed and shipped back, and have it still be in the 9.8 condition, especially when it's that valuable. All right, well, I think that's about going to wrap things up for us. Eddie, Rick, thank you for sharing your expertise. I hope you'll both come back and join us again. Well, Eddie, you'll obviously be back, your co-host.
Yeah,
Rick, I hope you'll come back.
I'll be back. But
Rick, I hope you will come back and join us again.
All you got to do is ask.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's what we like to hear. So thank you very much.
If you want to go check out the new Collector's annual issue number 5, you can always go to collectorscomic.com and order one.
All right. Make sure you head over and check out GNN podcasts. Also, make sure you check out Contest of Champions presented by Nerd Dome. It's a real fun game show style podcast that I think you guys will dig. So check that out as well. And that'll do it. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
And all right.
This show is part of the Geek Nerd Network. Find more shows like it at geeknerdnetwork.com. This is GNN.
What is fandom?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Fandom is your obsession with TV, movies, comics, and books.
Fandom is debating whether or not Goku or Superman would win in a fight. Clearly, it's Batman.
Fandom is about liking things. Join us weekly on Fandom as we talk about all of that and more. Subscribe at fandompodcast.com.